Well, Michael, thank you very much for talking to Energy Media today. And we are, now you're the executive director of Canadians for Clean Prosperity and an economist by training, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Excellent, because we're going to talk about journalism and economics. So this ought to be interesting. So we have had a discussion about the media coverage around the climate plans of the four federal parties. So the Greens and the NDP and the Liberals and the Conservatives. And there's been a fairly poor, I guess you and I would agree, a fairly poor reporting about what's in them, how they compare, and so on. What's your general take on that issue?
I'm really struggling to understand why people are trying to claim that the conservative plan and the liberal plan are equivalent, because to my eye, they are starkly different. The conservative plan, and we have a full report on this, would actually raise emissions by 30 megatons in the most generous scenarios that we ran relative to the status quo today. Whereas the Liberal plan has taken us about 3/4 of the way, and they certainly still need to do more, but about 3/4 of the way to the Paris targets. And they, of course, have announced a number of initiatives during this campaign to go beyond that, with the eventual goal, though we still need more specifics, of getting us to net zero by 2050. So to me, they're two completely different paths that the two parties are proposing.
I would agree with that. In my climate plan analysis for the Conservatives, I focused in on something that almost I don't think it gets discussed at all, which is the fact that Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives are essentially taking a page out of the Trump Rick Perry playbook, which is a bandit. They don't want anything to do with carbon pricing, or very little. They really don't like rules, subsidies, and standards, and they've kind of put all of their money on subsidies. And that is the Rick Perry mantra, as I call it, the innovation, not regulation, and hoping that new technologies will somehow magically get us to net zero by whenever. And it's been missed by the mainstream media. And I think it's a major policy departure. It would be a major policy departure from the federal government, which I think is really worth talking about.
Yeah, it seems as though a lot of the mainstream media are just taking Andrew Scheer's talking points at face value. So it's well and good, for example, to talk about innovation and technology as a component of a plan, but to rely on technology that is not yet invented in some cases, and in most cases certainly not yet proven, as the key part of a plan that needs to make progress immediately on a situation that's urgent is just it's not good enough. And I kind of equate it to the idea of, and I heard another commentator talking about this too, saying, look, it would sort of be like saying there's a fire in your house,
Right.
but you can't use a fire extinguisher, you can't call the fire department, but maybe we'll invent some technology in the future that may be able to put out this fire. It's like, well, we have tools available to us today, and if you're telling us you don't want to use them, how important is putting out this fire really to you? So I don't understand why that's being told. And maybe just one other quick point on that, another talking point that people often ascribe to the conservative plan is the idea that they are going to focus on taxing big polluters rather than having an economy-wide carbon tax. Well, there is currently a plan that taxes big polluters. And to the extent we can understand what Andrew Scheer's plan is, because it is fairly general, it seems to suggest almost exactly the same kind of program that is already in place and working, except that we don't know what those standards are going to be. So, it is a little bit perplexing.
One of the things I've noticed in this election particularly, and maybe it's because newspapers and media in general are really short-staffed, and there's not enough bodies to go around to do the work. But if we're talking about climate policy, which is energy policy as well, we should always talk about it as climate/energy policy, because the two are interrelated.
Sure.
Why aren't we not talking about experts? Now we see experts. So, for instance, Professor Andrew Leach from the University of Alberta, and Catherine Cahoe is I forget where she teaches, but she's
Yeah, Texas,
teaching
yeah.
Yeah, no, they will do commentary, but the kind of the conversations that you and I are having about these various is almost, I would say, not just rare. Nobody does it. And how are voters supposed to understand the complexities of these policies if all they're getting is the leaders' talking points regurgitated in general reporters kind of news stories? If you're perplexed, I'm more perplexed by this. It bothers me to know.
Yeah. And yeah, no, and look, the part for sure, and look, part of it is that this is complicated, right? When you really get into the details,
Right.
it does require some expertise and technical knowledge to fully assess out the plans. But uh, you know, at their surface, you can already start to see the differences. So when you have a plan that is going to raise emissions, and you have another plan that is going to continue to reduce emissions, I mean, right there, you kind of can say, okay, there is a difference between these plans. Um, it I do wonder a little bit whether a little bit of the reporting is because historically, both liberals and conservatives have made pledges to reduce their emissions, have talked about lofty things, and have not delivered.
Could be.
And that is true, right? So perhaps people are not giving the liberals um, and the benefit of the doubt that some of their plans that have been announced will come to bear. But I think that's a bit short-sighted when some of the tools they're using are things like carbon pricing, which we know are in place. The law has been passed. It is going to continue to rise. So it is
Right.
happening. And we don't need to. It doesn't behoove us to be skeptical about that. It's happening.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for this. I'm sure we could go on for a long time criticizing the other media who are not doing a good enough job. But thank you very much for this, and we'll look forward to chatting with you in the near future.
Pleasure. Good to be with you.